Welcome to UNCAGED, a show that celebrates thought leadership from today's top business leaders. The program provides a voice to amazing executives from around the globe who are shaping the world of business today and mapping the path to the commerce of tomorrow. Today, we're speaking with James Cannings. Hey, James.
Hey, Ben. Great to be here.
It's great to have you on the show, James. James is the Chief Sustainability Officer at MSQ. He's working with clients on lower carbon digital platforms and developing those platforms. And we'll talk also about MSQ and all of the things that organization's doing to be a carbon negative organization and helping other companies with their own low carbon business initiatives. But before we get there, James, tell us a little bit about your career.
I will do that as briefly as I can. My CV is pretty short. I've had one job, and it's nothing to do with sustainability really. I founded an agency called MMT Digital with my buddy Ben Rudman, who I've known since I was 6 weeks old. We grew up together, and when we came out of university in 1999, I'm a computer scientist. Ben was a business guy, and we founded what kind of became a fairly technical digital agency. And through that, lots of different roles, technical and agile delivery, and just all the kind of commercial stuff that goes with growing an agency. And then, very long story short, but at around about our 20th anniversary, just to kind of explain how I got from that to Chief Sustainability Officer, so around about 2018, 2019 was our 20th anniversary. And I think, like lots of people, Ben and I were growing a business, but we were having conversations around, well, there's got to be more to life than how big can we grow the business and, measure our success by, revenue and EBITDA. And so I said, look, I'll go and measure our carbon footprint, and I'll go and create a path to carbon neutrality. Net zero wasn't even a term back then, but people might remember there were lots of companies, and still are, sort of saying, oh, we're going to get to carbon neutral in 5 years' time or some other time frame. And I honestly thought I was going to spend an afternoon in Google going, banging in some numbers. And really, that was the start of a journey that I'm still on, 3-4 years later, when I realized just how hard, particularly for SMEs, it is. It's a minefield of terminology, scope 1, 2, 3, the 15 categories of scope 3, the calculators are all over the place. People running SMEs aren't going to read 200-page PDF documents on the greenhouse gas protocol. And then you've got to learn about the offset markets and the difference between that and permanent carbon capture and tree planting. And it's just overwhelming. But luckily, I just kind of persevered and developed my own tools and knowledge, and then carved out a niche really within our parent company. So MSQ bought my agency a few years ago. And I don't think my job existed in a company our size 10 years ago. MSQ's 1,000 people, but that's relatively small to have a Chief Sustainability Officer. But yeah, just kind of from that.
So let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, MSQ is a relatively young firm. It's really one of the more innovative marketing agencies now in the world, delivering solutions really truly integrated, broad-based marketing communications and business solutions. Tell me a little bit about how the Chief Sustainability Officer got shaped and the types of stuff you're working on.
Initially, there's kind of two pillars to what I'm working on, and it really came out of the first one. And the first was, like all companies, it became increasingly aware that having a path to net zero and understanding what that means, it was becoming more and more important. Sustainability in the broadest sense was always important, but as a people business, I think a lot of agencies are relatively mature in terms of diversity and inclusion and ethics, and so all of that sort of stuff. But the environmental sustainability piece, like lots of SMEs, again, we were kind of lagging behind. And because I'd done this work at MMT, at that point, MMT was a carbon negative organization. We'd measured our footprint, we'd done a lot of avoidance offsetting, and we were starting to put some good reduction strategies in place. It was relatively easy to sort of pick that up and roll it out across the MSQ agencies. That was a quick win. How can we go carbon negative? How can we start to reduce our carbon footprint and put our net zero targets in? And that was kind of pillar one. keeping our house in order, really. There's a lot that goes into that, to be carbon negative, to have a net zero strategy, formal science-based targets. We've got the military pledge, lots of good things that we can do. And that adds huge value, of course, more and more to get through procurement, to get through the door, to supply big companies. There's this kind of commercial win-win with what I do that perhaps didn't exist 10 years ago, which is why my job does exist. That in itself has huge value. But then the other pillar and the other focus for my work is, of course, around, well, what is our customer proposition, or how do we layer environmental sustainability into our customer proposition?
And I'm really interested in that, James, because you come from a digital background. So how are you bringing those two worlds together?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, across the sort of 10 or so agencies in MSQ, we cover a broad range of services for, I guess, for a CMO primarily, MMT perhaps more towards the CIO. So that is digital, tech, websites, apps, but it's offline marketing as well, it's advertising, media, kind of everything. And my role is essentially to help position MSQ as global leaders in environmentally sustainable marketing, like whatever that means. And what we're doing essentially across each of those MSQ agencies is looking at what that means in the context of what that agency delivers. So for MMT, that's how can we build, and why should we build, lower carbon websites and apps? For other agencies, it's how can we think about designing more environmentally sustainable packaging. For others, it's, how can we, look at low carbon film shoots and mitigate that and reduce the digital footprint of those streaming adverts. So it's really just kind of, applying some of what I've learned in terms of how you measure some of these things into the sort of specific and existing proposition that the agencies have, and then just putting that different lens on it. But I think the two pillars go hand in hand. We can't do that or talk to our clients about it from a position of authority, regardless of the impact that might have, if we haven't got our own house in order. So the two strategies are really important.
No, I find it really interesting. I did a doctorate in machine learning a couple years ago, and one of the things that I did not really go into tremendous depth in my PhD was an area of research that probably deserves a lot more work, which is the carbon impact of machine learning. And, there was, at the time when I wrote, there were maybe 2 or 3 papers that had been written about it. And it was daunting, because the way that the models are written now to apply really some of the, I mean, I wouldn't say leading edge machine learning, but kind of the commercial grade machine learning is really kind of inefficient and has a huge carbon footprint. So there definitely is a challenge there that we have to kind of wrestle with.
Massively. We could probably spin off into my degree actually was originally in computer science and cybernetics, so we could probably spin off for far too long kind of going into the depths of that. But absolutely, look, I think there are some headline stats that bounce around. The internet having a larger carbon footprint than the airline industry. But it's nuanced in that, and whether you're talking about AI and machine learning or websites or or technologies such as the Zoom call that we're sat on right now, I think it's a comparison that you can make, but it's very different, and there's the few reasons for the differences. One is the profile of the footprint. So the airline industry is 30 or 40 million flights, and the internet is 4.5 billion people who have access to it, making trillions of interactions. So therefore that profile makes it very different, because no single company, unlike an airline, is potentially going to have a particularly big meaningful impact on that. So we have to understand how we kind of drive systemic change, and understand the benefits of reducing your digital footprint, because they're not actually necessarily about reducing your carbon footprint in a meaningful way. Like, for example, if a company has a top 20 things that they should look at to reduce their carbon footprint today, your digital footprint isn't going to
It's
get
not
on
going to
that
be the
list.
top one.
But we can talk about why, maybe get into why it's compelling to do it.
Yeah.
But the other big important factor, and it depends what your machine learning is doing or anything's doing, is that of course you can draw a spectrum, and a digital footprint somewhere on that spectrum will have an offline carbon benefit. Right. So, and the obvious example is this Zoom call that we're sat on right now. It's got quite a high digital carbon footprint. But we know from our data over COVID in MSQ and globally that the impact of technologies like this, has an enormous benefit to offline carbon footprints, because we travel less. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you've got Netflix, you've got TikTok, you've got all sorts of things with big digital footprints, or digital advertising for brand products, to pull it into an MSQ example, and those, the benefits there are very different. And you have to start to think about, where you sit on that digital footprint, and how you reduce it, but also perhaps how you tell consumers about the offline benefit. So it's just a really, really interesting area. It's interesting to hear that there were only a couple of papers written when you were looking at it. I still think it's quite embryonic, and I do a lot of talks very specifically on digital footprints, because
it's an uncomfortable discussion, because I don't know if the tech industry feels ready to fully embrace the fact that they use so much energy. I mean, you really have to get in a specific room with certain people to have that honest conversation. And, clearly companies like Google and Facebook and Microsoft understand it very clearly, in the sense that the challenge that they have for all of this cloud computing elements it's massive, right? It's a real challenge for them on how to manage that.
It is. I mean, you can read different statistics on it, but potentially it's not as much about the crunching that goes on at the data center as people think. Some algorithms have that more at like 10, 20%. I mean, fine, if you've got a big, machine learning kind of heavy duty crunching, that might be different. But actually, when you think about what we're talking about, when we talk about the carbon footprint of the internet, it's a bit about data centers, but actually mostly it's about all of that data moving around the planet. So if you think about loading a Facebook page in the UK, that's data that's traveling through fiber optic networks, 4G, 5G, satellites bouncing around the place. And when you add up all those trillions of interactions, it doesn't magically arrive at its destination. It's the data transfer. But just on that point, just to finish on it, just to kind of bring it back to a kind of simple explanation of how you sell it and why it's a great thing to do. An example that most people are aware of is Amazon one-click, right? We all use Amazon probably, too much, and I'm not holding them up as, bastions of great carbon footprint. I'm sure, we all order far too much stuff, but Amazon one-click, been around for years, right? And in our world of marketing, that's like the ultimate user experience. Like, wow, these guys turned 5 steps into 1. Everybody's heard about Amazon one-click. Now, Amazon for at least a decade have also been talking to us about how important it is to have very fast, responsive, lightweight page loads, right? They had all that data on every 100th of a second less the page load is, we make, X amount more money, right? Crazy amounts of money. Now, both of those two things are very different. One is a very simple user experience, and one is a very fast page load time. And both of those drive conversions and improve the digital experience. Both of those are an absolute masterclass in digital carbon footprint reduction, right? But we don't look at it through that lens. It's not talked about through those lenses. And that's the way I try and sort of communicate.
No, I really like that. That's a really thoughtful way of thinking about it, and certainly a dimension in the conversation that's really important to keep in mind. But when you're out there, James, talking to all of the different clients that MSQ has, what are the key topics on their mind, and how are they getting on the sustainability topic?
It's a great question. I mean, certainly, with my job floating across at MSQ, I'm not as actively engaged directly with the MSQ clients, but I do work very closely with our new business teams, for whom being able to talk about this stuff is hugely important. And what is certainly noticeable is that, every single bit of new business, every single pitch we are responding to has a sustainability element. Like, everybody's asking for it. Like, that's universal. There's almost no pitch where they don't want to know about your own sustainability credentials. And it's primarily that, so the work that we do, our net zero journey, our carbon negative status, our million tree pledge, all of the things that we do is hugely important. Those are really important assets because, so I guess what I'm seeing at the moment is the primary driver are the large organizations that we work on. They have net zero targets more and more, or science-based targets. And they know that includes their scope 3. So that includes their supply chain. And they know they're not going to hit those targets unless they start to make sure that their suppliers go on that journey. And it's this lovely sort of cascade effect.
So that's really interesting. So it has become really a pillar of the procurement process, the pitch process.
Absolutely. And I'd like to see it become even more kind of black and white, pass fail. If you don't have science-based targets, you can't work for us. It's not quite there yet. It's 5%, 10%. I'd like to see that, pushed on a bit more, but it's certainly a factor. And so that's particularly important. I'd say on the other side of things, the digital footprint side, that's probably a layer at the moment that we're adding on as a sort of, a value add, because I do think it's quite embryonic. A lot of our clients aren't actually yet thinking about it. So they're not quite there yet in terms of saying, oh, well, we want this website, we want this marketing campaign, but, we want to sort of think about the digital footprint of that campaign and the impact. But certainly when we talk about it, it's of great interest. And I think this stuff is going to get bigger and bigger over the next few years.
That's great. Well, let's change gears a little bit. And I don't want to dwell really in the early phases of the pandemic, but I am curious because, James, I love the way your brain works and how you're describing these things. What are some of the learnings that we are taking away from this pandemic period that we can apply to some of the sustainability issues that we're looking at now?
I mean, it's from a sort of sustainability point of view and from a digital transformation within large organizations point of view, it has been, and I don't want to kind of be overexcited about it because obviously I wouldn't wish it on the world, and it's been incredibly tough for a lot of people and continues to be tough. But from an environmental sustainability point of view, it has been an incredible, experiment. So from that point of view, if I just take MSQ's own footprint, because, and we're a professional services company, so it's going to impact different people in different ways, but we saw a complete collapse in our emissions of around about 50%, all of course, driven by business commuting and travel collapsing. We saw an uptick of around about 9% because we also track home worker emissions. So of course you can't just pat yourself on the back when your offices are shut down. If you've got everybody at home, what's the incremental impact of that? But it certainly doesn't outweigh the travel. And then, again, as a professional services company, that we weren't, hugely impacted from a revenue point of view. That wasn't a 50% collapse in footprint because our, company was shrinking. In fact, we traded very well over the pandemic. And so what we need to do is kind of carry that data through. And I feel like my job at MSQ, as we now come out of it, isn't to dictate policy on, I don't have the power to say, right, we can't fly, we can't do this, we can't do that. There's factors, there's culture, there's mental health, there's the performance of the business. But my job is to throw this into the mix so that we're starting to think about the environmental sustainability benefits. And then finally, on the other pillar, there's lots of evidence to show that, there's been this huge exponential growth in digital transformation, which is great because typically there are some huge environmental benefits of those digital transformations and what they're enabling. For example, lots more people using this type of technology, but there are lots and lots more examples. But again, just re-emphasizes what I talked about. We still need to be mindful of the carbon footprint of those digital platforms that we're building. And the lovely win-wins that I talked about I hope that's going to happen.
Will those stick? I mean, I guess the big question now is that now we're now in 2022. We face different challenges, new challenges in the world, but from a pandemic perspective, we're coming out of that in some form or fashion. And just be curious to see what this year looks like. What do you think the key areas of focus will be in the sustainability area?
Well, I think for me, it's just, I mean, I'm in a bit of a bubble with it, but it's just going to be kind of banging the drum and making sure that, for example, COP26 wasn't just this big spike and that there was a lot of noise and PR and discussion, but now the kind of hard work continues. I think there were a lot of people very concerned that we were going to have another kind of lost 10 years. So, I mean, many people listening to this, like myself, might remember listening to things like Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth, back in sort of whenever that was, 2006, 07, 08. And then we had the banking crisis. And the problem was the world went into meltdown. And of course, it wasn't top of priority. And we talk about this kind of lost 10 years. And now it's kind of coming back round onto the radar. And I think people like myself were very concerned that that's going to happen again. We've had this pandemic that's going to cause huge economic problems. And actually, so far, it feels like it's had the opposite effect. And I could be wrong here. This is anecdotal and in my bubble, but it feels like it's brought people closer to humanity's sort of mortality and the fragility of our planet and the environment in which we exist. And so actually, it's put even more, focus on it. And I think continue to be these huge, the difference between now and 10 years ago, like there's huge money really in getting this right, whether you're trying to create the world's first net zero aircraft or, develop permanent carbon capture. I may misquote this because I think it was Warren Buffett recently, but it might have been someone else with a lot of money talking about the fact that they felt the next $1 trillion startup was going to, would be an environmental business of some sort. And again, you can have a whole other debate about the role of capitalism in its ability to fix the problem that ultimately it's created. But I'm kind of optimistic, particularly when there's a lot of money to be made.
I think the one thing that really stands out in this discussion with you, James, is that sustainability has become a key factor in the interactions and the commercial relations between companies. It's something that is expected to be there now. It is a deciding factor in contractual negotiations. And that is, I think, quite telling. And so that really shows how this will become more and more important as we build more and more bridges and move more and more into areas that will allow us to handle the challenges of meeting a carbon neutral or low carbon solution going forward. James, if someone wanted to reach you to talk to you and about what you guys are working on, where can they find you?
But I mean, the best place to find me is on LinkedIn, Twitter to a lesser degree. I am on that. I need to get better on there, but just kind of find me on LinkedIn, hunt me out. The other thing I'd love to sort of shout out about is one of the things I did last year, or what I'm kind of keen to do is open source everything that I do. So my messaging at MSQ is very much, look at all the great stuff we're doing on our path to net zero. Here's how you could do it. And so last year I launched a free course on the FutureLearn e-learning platform. And if people reach out or Google it or whatever, or I can point them in the direction, or maybe we can share some links. There's a free course titled very simply, how to measure, reduce and offset your company's carbon footprint. It's very practical, tactical, and it uses and steps people through all of the tools, everything that I've learned over the last 4 or 5 years, and all of the tools that we use at MSQ, particularly aimed at SMEs. We've got 1,200 companies from all over the world enrolled on that already. It's proving really popular. So that's kind of open sourcing that area. So if you're an SME listening to this, that's an amazing resource. If you're a big company listening to this, it's quite a useful resource for the SMEs on your supply chain, instead of just beating them up and saying, you got to sort this out. And then on the digital footprint side of things, I also the co-chair of the BEMA Sustainability Council. And last year we launched a website, a low carbon website called The Green Pages, which is a curated set of resources for any digital team, tech, creative, infrastructure, content, media, advertising, to help them think about, measure and build lower carbon digital solutions. So please do reach out and grab me, but MSQ can't save the world. Obviously, MSQ can't solve the world's digital carbon footprint problem. So I've always been keen to open source.
James, it's been great talking to you today. We've been chatting with James Cannings. He is the Chief Sustainability Officer at one of the most innovative marketing agencies in the world, MSQ. And he's been working with them to develop lower carbon digital platforms for clients, as well as work with the MSQ pool of talent and teams to deliver stronger carbon neutral solutions. As I said, the incredible thing here is how much the carbon discussion has become central in discussions with potential clients going forward. And really, it is going to be part of the way we do business going forward. And James is a great person to chat with on this stuff. So James, thank you so much for being here today. And we look forward to having you back.
Thanks, Ben. Ben, it's been a great pleasure. Really enjoyed it.
Cheers.
Thank you.